for folks who are working in architecture, work-life balance seems like a dream almost sometimes that is completely out of reach. But at least I feel that both of you have achieved some level of balance in there. My question for you is, when did you first get the feeling that it was out of balance? And two, what were you tuning for when you decided to look for that balance?
First of all, what are you talking about? Like, there is no balance. It's just work, 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 work.
So in this episode, me, Libo, Alex, and Minku, we're going to talk about work. You guys ready?
Yes. Let's do it.
All right, let's get to work. So we should start, with a quote from a very successful female entrepreneur. She puts, in her words, work as work, 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 work. So I want to pose the question to you: what is work, and how is it different from careers?
That's a $1 billion quote right there. Work is making a difference. Work is doing something that has an effect on the world. I think that's the basis of it. Obviously, there's other components to it, but it's very easy to think that work is how you get paid, but you only get paid when you do something of value.
For me, work is doing stuff that is not rest. So outside of rest, whatever you're doing for your career or for yourself, something of interest, something that can create value, that is work.
We're all working. We're working on this podcast, but it's something that's quite different from a career, and it's quite different from a job. So what's the difference between work, a career, and what passes as a job?
Well, this is not a job for sure. A job brings you income. A career, I guess there's some ego involved. There is a objectivity, and something that you want to achieve in your life, something that you care about, maybe make an impact to the world and the people that surround you. Maybe that's career.
Maybe sort of like nesting dolls. Work fits into a job, and the job fits into a career, and then a career fits into the larger mission, larger direction that you might have. I feel like
a Russian.
There's a hierarchy. Yeah, exactly. Like the Russian nesting dolls. There's a hierarchy there. And they exist on different scales, different time frames. They have different impacts.
So for you guys, when you were thinking about your careers in the long term and deciding where to take your next job, where to execute the next phase of your work, what went through your mind? What was the comparison between the two for you?
Well, there's always the immediate needs. What am I doing? Like, what do I do day to day? I show up at 9 o'clock. Do I log on my computer, answer emails? That's sort of the inputs for work. And I think the things that really start to make one think about if it's working or not, no pun intended, is if the inputs and the outputs are aligned. Meaning, am I putting in what I need to get what I want coming out? And at every stage of my career, when I started to think, maybe it's time for a switch, it's when I started to say, okay, I'm getting something out of this, but is it commensurate with what I'm putting into it? And if not, something's got to give. So I think that the changes are always come about with questions. I don't know if that's the same for you, Minku. You and I have gone through a sort of similar career trajectory where we've switched from one entry point, which is architecture, into other facets of design.
Yeah, it was very similar to me. The reason why I had to switch was because I just couldn't do it anymore. And like to your point, Alex, the input and the output was imbalanced. Input side, it required a lot of attention, a lot of dedication, a lot of maybe sometimes sacrifice of your personal life. The output side was not matching what I was putting in. So I think when that imbalance happens, then you simply get burned out because you're not getting the return out of what you're putting in. So naturally, even if you want to stay, in my case, I just couldn't do it anymore. When you go to work, you can feel it. In the morning, you feel dreadful. If you go to work, when you're entering that elevator, that corridor feels like miles and miles away. And when you get to your desk, like you're kind of like stunned, right? Like you can't do anything. Your mind is refusing to work. And you just physically cannot do it anymore. So you just have to say, to yourself that, okay, I'm going to stop. I'm going to try something different. But some people, even when they get to that point, some people choose to stay on it. and some people, think about other options. And I happen to be the latter person who just wanted to jump off the ship and try to maybe swim by myself or try to see what happens. I didn't kill myself, luckily.
And I would just say, though, there is this impression that what we do is who we are. And
Mhm.
I would say that you only find out who you are by doing different things. And
Right.
so there is also, at least us growing up, our generation, our parents mostly did one thing their whole life. I
Yeah.
don't think that's
Mhm.
uncommon, to be honest. And as millennials, we looked at that and thought, okay, that might be what we do. And then I think when we got into the workforce, we said, oh, maybe that's not for me. I want to try different things. As a sort of
Yeah.
stereotype about our generation, but I think it's really true. And I speak for myself, but probably you guys too. You only find out what you like to do, what you enjoy doing, what you don't like doing by actually trying it. And so
Mhm.
work is also succeeding and failing. It's trying different things. And I think one thing that's important is also trying to figure out, does this work for me personally, who
Mhm.
I am? Not necessarily does it work for my neighbor, does it work for my dad, does it work for my friend? And so this idea about who you are as a worker, I think is also it only develops when you also start to understand who you are as an individual
That's an
in the
interesting point,
context
I
in your
think,
life.
about identity. It's ingrained in our culture, even when we introduce ourselves to each other. It's like, hi, I'm Lebo, I am a X. And then
Yeah.
X is
Mm.
whatever I happen to be doing at the time.
First
But-
question is always, what do you do? What do you do for a living?
Right. But I'm not, I guess I can say from now on that I host podcasts, right?
Yeah.
But maybe it's something else. That part of how work is tied to identity, I think, is at a center of a lot of struggles people might have with whether or
Mhm.
not what they're in their gut feeling about the job or the work that they're currently doing and thinking about switching to. It's the fear potentially of a split from an identity they've held on to for so long.
And I think that's totally fine. Your work doesn't have to mean yourself. It doesn't have to be your identity. Work can be just work. Work can, you just work to bring bread on your table, to secure your free time. If that work brings a lot of bread to your table, then that's great. If it doesn't, then you try to find a better work. Maybe I'm just being very ignorant about that, but I see a lot of people who do that, and I also respect them, because
No.
I myself, I have a very challenging time doing it. So
But totally.
it's just a
There's
different lifestyle.
People who live to work and people who work to live. And that's just, I think you need both in society. I have friends who they have a great job, they enjoy what they do, but that's not what their focus is. They're looking towards the weekend, towards what they're going to do there with their partner, with their friends, the travels that they're going to have. And work is a way to get there. For other people who have a much more fluid lifestyle and fluid work lifestyle, I think sometimes they look towards the weekends to do some of the things towards work that they haven't had a chance to do while they're answering emails during the week. And that's totally fine as well.
You guys talked earlier about the difference between work and a job. You talked a lot about inputs and outputs. So can we maybe be a little bit transactional, talk a little bit about the specifics outside of the identity, outside of the personality? What are these inputs and outputs, and how should we think about balancing these two?
Well, fundamentally, when you have a job, you're giving your time, attention, and focus and actions for some sort of remuneration, usually a salary or an hourly wage. Obviously, there's other benefits and there's status and there's opportunities that come around with a job. But fundamentally, it is a transaction.
Right. It's a transaction for time. So you're not everyone, but typically you give 9 to 5 of your daily time, Monday through Friday, to work. So on the input and output side, you are putting at least like 1/3 of your life in doing this type of work. And you may just find that, people may think that, okay, like I don't need to get anything out of it. But people who want to get something out of it on the output side, if you're not feeling that you're being valued, or if you're not feeling that you're achieving something when you're using that time, like succeeding in some way, then that's when the imbalance happens. Like you're not getting fulfilled by the investment that you're making. Although you're getting, salaries. Salaries are never enough for most people. I think even for the higher earners, like 200K, 300K earners, I would think that they want to have more. No one likes to have less. So salary isn't everything, for me at least.
You're always going to want to get that higher tax threshold. You always want to reach for more. And I do think that people sometimes think that money is going to solve everything. And I think it can solve a lot of things, but it's not going to fix everything. There's the typical iBanker lifestyle where you're just making tons of money, but you have nothing else besides your job. And that's not great either.
So when you talk about value outside of the strictly monetary sense, what are some of the other ways that you have felt valued in your previous workplaces?
The sense that I'm doing something good was very important to me. Like I'm doing something that's meaningful to me, and that may be helping other people to experience something or helping other people's lives. In a way, in my context, through buildings, like through design, you just have that belief and this kind of, especially if you're a designer, you have this kind of idealistic vision, right? You think that people will be enjoying the space that you're providing. Having that sense was very important.
I think if we're dealing with the built environment, one thing that people really value is the opportunity to be creative, to make things. There's a lot of literature and research on this, but working with your hands, creating things is really therapeutic. It's quite rewarding just at a basic biological level. And so if you're an architect, if you're a developer, if you're a planner or someone working in the community, having that ability to take your ideas and implement them, however quickly or slowly that is, I think is extremely valuable. And that's probably the greatest sense of accomplishment that one can have in some of these domains. We've talked about that before, Minku and Libo. When you see your work created, even if it's just, I said that wall should be blue and I see it and it's blue. It's just such an awesome feeling. The problem is it takes a long time, but once it's done, it's great.
Right. So in a way, there's another aspect of feeling valued that comes with impact, whether you're impacting people's lives, or you're impacting the built environment, or just seeing something that you've worked on go out into the real world and face the world without you.
Yeah, no doubt. I think you want to see the fruits of your labor and have that sense of accomplishment, because that builds confidence, that makes you want to do it again, that makes you feel like it was worth it in the first place. So
you get hooked.
Yeah, it can be addictive, and some people do get a little bit too addicted to it. But you know, it is something that I think is distinct within our discipline. We're not moving value around. We're trying to create value, and I think that's really important.
When we're talking about inputs and outputs, the major input is time, and you, as the worker, more often than not, do have a choice on where you put your time. So when you are feeling undervalued, underappreciated, maybe the outputs don't balance the inputs, what do you do? How do you make some of these decisions on where to go next?
Well, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again without anything changing. I'm not saying I've ever gotten to that point necessarily, but when something isn't working, I think one just has to consider, well, what can I do to adjust? What can I do to change? To me, I use a lot of cooking analogies in my life. You test the recipe. Does it need more salt? Does it need more water? Does it need more of this or that? You test it and you make minor adjustments over a period of time. And then finally you get to an equilibrium that you're satisfied with. And I think for work, that's an ideal work environment will allow you to do that. Now, that's not always possible because of bureaucracies and rules and guidelines and regulations, which may be there for a really good reason. But I think the ability to have some level of control over your input-output relationship at least makes you want to keep going. Once that control is gone, then it's time to look for greener pastures.
Yeah, and a sense of ownership, right, to the work that you're producing. You feel empowered when people acknowledge your contribution. But if, because of office culture or whatever, bureaucracy, office politics, if, it often happens when even though it's your contribution, if it's your work and you produced it, someone takes the credit. And that is a feeling that I don't like.
Yeah.
The one interesting thing that was raised in perhaps the negative that you guys both mentioned is the bureaucracy or politics of the office that is the instigation of some of these feelings. Why do you think that is? It seems to be this, if not scapegoat, for a lot of workplace complaints.
I think for me, maybe it's somewhat related to my background. I mean, I'm Korean, And the Asian work culture and the American work culture, there is a huge difference. So in the Asian work culture, I can't say it for everyone. How I experience it and how I understand it is that it is very hierarchical. And and when you start at a lower position, you are supposed to be or expected to be obeying to your superiors kind of direction or order, and you have this feeling of constantly being evaluated by your superior. And if you are lacking performance, you get kind of pressured. Not if it's not all the time present at the office, but you yourself apply that pressure to yourself. And I think that's also part of the thing that undermines your ability. It naturally makes you to self-doubt what you're doing. And in my case, it got worsened when you're in the creative field where there isn't a very clear answer to things, where you have to either test or, just think about it freely. And that was some difference between the American culture is more individualistic, it's more idea driven, and people are more self-conscious and they have a stronger ownership to what they produce. Therefore, they can stand by. If they can stand by their work, they can argue with their superiors and they can push it as much as they think it's relevant. Of course, I think there is this kind of relationship between the superior and the underling, and you always have a boss to report to. But I think the sensitivity here is more lax, and this feeling of self-doubt is less. So there is more freedom in terms of work. But for me, like working in a different context at a creative office, it was a little troublesome to a point that I was like cornering myself constantly. And I think that kind of at the end contributed to me being kind of burned out, because I just couldn't find a way to, move forward.
No, I also come from the Asian context to a certain extent. I've worked in Asia and dealt with some of that culture, and I definitely think it exists, Minku. I don't think it's too much of a generalization. Part of it is just the competition. There's so many people in Asia, in Korea, in China, and in Taiwan, Japan, and there's only so many spots, so you are expected to sort of fit in. But if we're talking about office politics, I had a manager, actually a very senior manager, tell me that in this organization, people think there's politics, but the only reason there's politics is because people think there's politics. In reality, there's no politics. And I just thought that was the worst thing you could ever say. There's politics in every situation. If you just want to define it, politics is the strengthening and reinforcement of one's individual position. It's that simple. And where are you going to find a place where no one is doing that? Mars? To be honest, it's just something that comes part and parcel with being in an organization. I mean, even amongst the three of us, we have politics, and I'll tell you why. Because we have different values, we're different people, we have different judgments, and we want to do different things. The great thing is, I think we align in a lot of regards, so we work together well. But in an organization, especially a large organization, you're going to have conflict, and that's not necessarily bad. That's just the nature of things. And if we want to live in a diverse, pluralistic society, we need to accept that. I think what happens is when that sort of conflict is not handled correctly, meaning people go about it in a very undermining way. They can be passive aggressive or straight up aggressive. It doesn't create a place where those conflicts are productive. In fact, they're reductive, and they just get in the way of everyone. And the final goal cannot be accomplished. So I do think it's incumbent on leadership to make sure that office politics are managed in a way that allow for things to occur well, so that people don't get pissed off and burned out. You don't usually quit the job. You usually quit the people around you, actually.
Yeah, that's a great quote. On the tech space, on the tech environment, there's this image of being more free and more relaxed, and also being more creative, and having this kind of work hours are also fluid. How is it, Libo, since you're in there? We'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think the two things Alex mentioned actually provide really strong foils for how it's different in tech. I think on one side, it's the ability to have conflict. I think that's where, especially in the software engineering culture, is very strong, because it's very much technical based. There is some provable result, whether one person is right or wrong, even though everyone can have different opinions, different ways of doing things. If it performs better, great. If it consumes less memory, great. And I think part of that has built this great culture where folks can come in, butt heads, but then agree to disagree. and continue kind of working together. And this is something that energizes me a lot, is being able to challenge someone in a conversation, get that productive discussion out of it, and have everyone emerge from it having learned something from each other rather than shouting each other down, which is something I feel like is experienced a lot in the construction industry, not only in architecture, but also across the board, across the chain. The other thing is the relationship between managers and, I guess, managees. I think that's the right word.
Those who are managed, yeah.
Those who are managed. And when I first, got into tech, I felt this was kind of weird, where instead of saying, hey, so and so is managed by X, they say, hey, X is supporting so and so. So it's this servant leadership mindset where you as a manager, you as a leader, is really there to support your team. What can you do to make your team more productive? What can you do to make them happier? And I think that contributes to an alignment of incentives, which I think is the other thing that you both touched upon, is everyone comes to the company with their own desires, with their own things that they want to get out of it. Sometimes those things aren't aligned, and that's okay to talk about, right? Let's find a place, let's find a situation where we can align our incentives and we can be more productive together. Part of just having that conversation alone at the beginning or throughout your relationship process can create this environment where you're comfortable talking to me, I'm comfortable talking to you in very candid terms about our relationship work.
Yeah, one thing that's amazing about the tech industry too, is it's so new. Within our lifetime, essentially, it's emerged. And so a lot of the dogmas, a lot of the bureaucracy that has been passed down in other industries just doesn't exist because they had to start from the beginning. And I think that level of newness has really allowed it to kind of wipe the slate clean and just start with what works, or with, at least within this context. And of course, there's certain organizations that they get bigger, they get larger, they get older, and things change. But I definitely see, hanging out with the ULIBO and also visiting your workplaces, you get a sense that there's something different here that doesn't exist in other places. And part of that, I think, has to do with this idea that we have a very clear goal, we have a very clear product. It is widely applicable. You work for Meta, that's we use their products every single day, and therefore we need to figure out the best way to make the biggest impact.
But I think it also comes with this level of individual responsibility, as you both talked about. I think in a building project, you are a part of a team, and there's almost always someone else to check your work, maybe stand on their shoulders to have some level of support. But in this environment, sure, you're given the autonomy to say, choose what you do, figure out how you want to go about things, but you do have that ultimate personal responsibility of making sure that thing crosses the finish line. And that sometimes is much harder because you have to look at everything around you and kind of define those thresholds, those goals that you need to achieve, instead of having, say, your manager, your superior, or your principal define those things for you.
So the office work culture, I think, is very important, and it can either empower or weaken one's productivity and one's comfortness in work. But although it's very important, it's sometimes very difficult to know about it until you actually experience it. So I guess my question would be, I'm sure that there are many people out there who are looking for work, actively looking for work. What's your thought, or based on your experience, or what will be your advice for people like that who wants to know that office culture? Or is it even possible to know the office culture without experiencing it?
I personally don't think it is, to be honest. I've had people say, oh, definitely work there, or definitely don't work there. And I've had my own opinions. And once I get there, I have different opinions. I think it's all context dependent, to be honest. You're a different person from whoever's giving you that advice. And so I think early in your career, it's a really good opportunity to just try different things, either through your internships or through a year here, a year there. You can, at that point, anything is knowledge. So try to experiment at that point.
I totally agree. I think especially the thing about how you're different than someone else, I have found out through my various job experiences, I really love really chaotic organizations. And that might not appeal to a lot of people. They'll say, hey, it's like too crazy here, things change all the time. But that's something that I thrive on. And part of it is picking up on those things that you really like. But I think the second part is when you interview, a lot of times it's them asking you questions and you answer. But you should ask questions back. And those are the little things you can ask to figure out if that culture is something that's a fit for you. Like questions that I really like to ask is like, okay, you're in this organization. What if you wanted to talk to someone on the other side of the company? How would you do that? Or like, you've been here X number of years. What is the number one thing you tell people who are starting new? Those are little things that I usually ask people that interview me to get a little sense of like who they are and how they live their life within the team or part of the organization. As we talk about the balance between who you are and where you go, I think a theme that we haven't really talked about is work-life balance. And especially for folks who are working in architecture, work-life balance seems like a dream almost sometimes that is completely out of reach. But at least I feel that both of you have achieved some level of balance in there. My question for you is, when did you first get the feeling that it was out of balance? And two, what were you tuning for when you decided to look for that balance?
Well, for me personally, I don't think, first of all, what are you talking about? Like, there is no balance. It's just work, 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 work. No, I'm just joking. And I think the balance doesn't mean that 9 to 5, after 5, like, don't touch me, like, don't come. I don't think it's that. It's really
not just
like
yoga mats.
Yeah, yoga mats and like meditation and like trying to find inner peace. I don't think it's that. I think it's really it's a balance between like what you guys have mentioned, what you prefer and what and then if you can find a way to find comfort in doing the work in the environment that you're provided, meaning that if you and that involves a level of understanding of your preference. So for me, 9 to 5, doing work 9 to 5, dreadful, to be honest. Like, to be on the same place on the same time every day for the rest of your life, what is a nightmare to me. So I would rather work different hours, but maybe sometimes 8 hours, sometimes less, sometimes 10, sometimes 12 hours. I like it being fluid, and also I have no problem working on the weekends if it needs to be. So for me, like, finding that fluidity and finding an entity that allows that was key. But unfortunately, I don't think it's something that a lot of architecture firms or design firms can allow, because it's teamwork. When it comes to teamwork, it's important to have that agreement that everyone comes works at the same time, because if you need to call someone, they have to be there to answer your questions. So I've achieved my balance by doing the work, honing my skills, and try to find projects that I can work based on my time, based on how I like to work. And I think development allows you to do that, because development work by nature, it's not always work. Sometimes it's a go, sometimes it's a stop because of whatever reasons. And maybe the community engagement part helps because they stop the work quite a lot. So you get to work a lot, concentrate your work, and then you move on to the different type of work. So finding that balance came from, for me, taking on multiple projects and try to juggle the time that needs to be concentrated was the way that I've achieved the balance.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the term work-life balance, because the image you have in your mind is that you have this much work and you have this much leisure, and if they're not aligned, if they're not the same amount, then something's wrong. I don't think that's right. I think balance to me, it's more about flow and the time that you're working and the time that you're not working. Hopefully the work energizes you or gives you the sort of sense of accomplishment that you need to then relax and to do leisurely things. And then that time gets reinvested and can come back into your work and help reinvigorate and energize that. So if there's that synergy, then you're balanced, in my opinion. So if that means you work 6 days a week and you rest for one, and you go for a long hike and you come back and you're in front of your computer, you're on the job site, whatever it is, and you can do that over and over and over again, so that the quality of both your time away from your work as well as the quality of your work increases, then that's in balance. There is this misconception, in my opinion, I think it's a very strong misconception, that work-life balance is simply that you don't work as much as you feel like you should. And I would say that, I would just say straight up, Minku, you and I worked at OMA, we worked like crazy there, like a lot. And I don't think the balance was very strong at a certain point, but I worked and we both worked there so much that I think we really got good at something, at a few things. And you realize how good you get once you see the fruits of that labor. And then at that point, you can say, okay, I don't need to put as much effort in there to get to that level. I can take advantage of that and I can do other things with that skill and that ability. Same for you, Libo, in terms of your coding and working at all these different startups. At that point, then you can take a step back and say, what is the best allocation of my time, resources, and energy? And that's when you start to create balance.
But I think the quality and the allocation aspect, to me, is really important when it comes to work-life balance, because it's not just about the hours we put in, but the quality of the hours we put in to get that outcome. And it's all about doing high leverage activities with high leverage time rather than doing a lot of low leverage activities with low leverage time, right? Because time is the one thing we never get back. And I think one thing that I've learned as I've worked and as I've gotten older is that taking time away from work sometimes is a way to make the time you spend at work higher leverage, which is counterintuitive. But once you start going, you sleep better, you have a more rested brain. Sometimes you just perform better and you can do more with less time.
Yeah, and I think that too, what's really important when you're dealing with the built environment from whatever angle is that you need to get outside of the office. You need to see things and be inspired. Whether it's going to see a movie or going to another country, you need to go out there, experience that, and then that will come back and bring back those experiences and those insights to your work. I generally think that when you're working on a building, you should be out there. You should be seeing architecture. You should be seeing spaces as much as possible, even if just whatever is around the block. Go for a 10-minute walk. But I think that is really vital. It's not like we can just come up with all these ideas without that inspiration or that precedent.
For sure. You know, I think the RPG games, like you have this MP box and then an HP box. I think it's really like
your health.
Yeah, your mana and your health. So if you need to fill them up with a portion, with the pills. Not literally with the pills, but I mean, you need to find an opportunity to fill them up in order to be active and productive in work. So that makes me think, like, this is just a personal question. Like, what do you guys like to do? What's your activity to go-to activity to fill up energy, fill up your creative energy, your kind of actual physical energy? What do you do?
I do this podcast.
It gives you energy. That's great.
This is the outcome. I think we all had that sort of idea that if we have all these thoughts in our mind and we'd like to discuss them, and so talking about them really helps in a very casual, non-professional, purposely non-professional way. I also, Minku, I just want to say that there was a certain point when I also thought that my life was like an RPG where you level up and you get better skills. And then if you in those games, if you go back to the starting area, you're a total boss and you just destroy everything. There's no point in being there, but you also don't get experience from going there. So you're constantly moving forward and progressing. I don't think you ever stop at a certain level. You just kind of want to keep going. And so, but like you're saying, you do need these inputs to help you out, to rejuvenate you. For me, it's always been travel, seeing things. There was also a moment too when food and cooking became really important. That was also during the pandemic. So it occurs within the context of the larger world when you can't actually go to restaurants. I found that cooking became this outlet for me to do something really creative, but in 30 or 40 minutes. And then I could experience and enjoy the outputs of that work right away versus a building which takes 3, 4, 5 years, which is much longer.
For sure. Yeah, I relate to that. When you're cooking, you release, right? You almost get into this trance level of a mindset. I mean, for me, I'm that type of cooker where the flow. You make intuitive decisions, like how much of pinch of salt you're gonna put. Like those are very intuitive actions. So that I relate to that.
And again, it's creative. I think creative stuff is really helpful, to be honest.
Right.
Things that engage your mind in capacities that cause you to think about what are the consequences of what I'm doing. At the same time, you also need to take care of your body. As I've gotten older, I realized that part of the reason I had to change my occupation was because I just couldn't do it physically anymore. There's things that you can do when you're 23 years old, like stay up all night, that you just can't do when you're 53. And that's fine.
Oh man,
that's what happens.
Yeah, an all-nighter, that became an expensive activity.
Yeah, I can't even stay up till midnight anymore. I'd much rather get up early and go for a walk than stay up late and be on my computer all the time.
Yeah.
How early do you get up?
I try to go to bed by 11 and wake up by 7, but that's something that is difficult, and especially when I'm traveling, that's hard.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well,
that
I'm
7
in
o'clock
Korea.
wake up is
Yeah,
I get up at 4 a.m.
So you're jet lagged. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think that part of it too is, we can blame sort of external factors for why we're not functioning at a high level. But there are things we can control, which is when we go to bed, what we eat, where we spend our time.
Mhm.
I will often find things that are really rejuvenating or actually learning things. So
Mhm.
learning new languages, learning new skills. Cooking was an example. Picking up a new hobby or sport. That sort of thing where you feel a sense of growth, that feels really
Right.
valuable to me. I'm not the type of person who just wants to veg out and do nothing. Although I have no problem with that.
Well, I'm actually the type of person who veges out. I just do nothing, lie on your bed. But I also find it rejuvenating by talking to people. I mean, this podcast being one, but also like talking to people who are not necessarily in your industry, but you have interests in what you share a common kind of. You share a common interest. You have an interest in what they do,
Totally.
and by talking to them, you learn a lot, and you get to see through their lens. Just get outside of your box for a second, and listen to what they are struggling with, and by listening to that, you can also look back at yourself, and it maybe inspire a way for you to overcome your current kind of issues. So yeah, talking to people for sure helped me a lot. But the time wasn't there when I was doing 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think again for me, what's important is like having a level of fluidity in work was very important.
Yeah, I think at a certain point, if you're dissatisfied or even if you're pretty happy but you want to improve, you just have to ask, what do I want to get? And then reverse engineer, how do I get back? And for designers, you're actually inherently good at doing that. For anybody who's doing project management on a building scale, you're also good at that. How do I reach the goal and kind of move backwards? So you can also problematize it in a way that fits one's skills and ability to figure things out. To me, that's what life is figuring it all out. And probably not going to figure everything out, but as much as I can to make sure that I have a good life, make sure that I'm happy, make sure that I'm doing good, I'm not hurting other people. That's good enough for me. I also say that I take a lot of inspiration from listening to people talk. I think it's great when we can actually engage, but that's not always feasible. But podcasts and books have been really helpful. On the state of work, this guy, Adam Grant, who works at Wharton, he studies work, and his tagline is he spends basically his whole life trying to figure out how to make work not suck. He's been really helpful for me because he's always talking to industry insiders who talk about how they deal with something in their discipline or in their field. And I know that within architecture, I probably can't do the exact same thing, but I can take certain frameworks and structures and try to implement them here.
So I think that's an interesting point to maybe pivot on. You guys are both building your own businesses, and we've spent maybe the past 40, 45 minutes talking about your experiences as employees of businesses. So what learnings and what things are you guys taking from your lessons learned so far and putting into your business?
For me, the basic skills that I provide as a service now, as part of my business, was all learned from the experiences at work. And also the credibility that I achieved by working at these institutions and firms allows me to communicate better with my clients and give faith in the level of work that I can deliver. And that was something that's very, very valuable. And also, it's a way of thinking. I would say like the OMA experience really has built a strong foundation of whatever I do next, because it basically taught me how to think, to structure my narratives, and also taught me how to communicate ideas. And those type of skills are continuously being valuable because it's all about communication. And the role of developer, especially, you are communicating to different industry professionals like architecture, engineering, city, community, construction, the sales. I think that's what I appreciate in doing. Try to be a better communicator in what, and also try to kind of motivate people and try to, create a team, build a team to achieve something that we all want, which is to build.
Yeah, communication is key. I think when you're working as an employee, especially if you have oversight from management, it's probably not the most important thing. You're actually listening more than you are communicating back.
Right.
But as you move up that chain, it is really important that you talk through things, you make things clear, you set out frameworks and systems for things to get done. I tend to think right now you can't over communicate.
Mm-hmm.
It's much better to over communicate than to under communicate.
For sure.
But I think on my side, when I'm, I spend a lot of time thinking about the culture that I want my company to be. And to be honest, Frank, it's probably not at all like any of the places I've worked. In fact, I'm very used to being in places where I don't necessarily fit in and just saying, okay, what can I get out of this? And what are the things that I want to differ from? And I don't see a problem with that. That's just trial and error. So I do think that, for instance, if I ever felt like I wasn't recognized or I wasn't invested in something, I really try to drill down. When I was an employee, I'm saying, really try to drill down and say, why was that? What are the things that could have been different that I could then implement here to make sure that my team is working cohesively and is working together? And a lot of times it's easier said than done, almost always. Sometimes you actually have no control because it might be something that has to do with the client. It might be something that has to do with other pressures that you just can't necessarily anticipate for. And fortunately, the burden falls on the team. But I think the most important thing is that as a leader, you lead. I think we don't understand how important that word is. It's not just about telling people what to do. It's not just about telling people how to do it. It's showing them, demonstrating to them what it means to do the work and what the impact or the value of that work is, or if something is hard, that we're going to get through this. So I've referenced on this podcast, I look at other forms of work. I look at entertainment, sports, for instance. I look at how those teams work because they have a shared goal, score them more points than the other team. And I think that it's really important that we start to develop those metrics or those directions so that everyone is on the same page as much as possible.
So on that, I think that's a good tee up to the part 2 of our conversation, where we'll talk about the business side of work. And if you're interested in that, stay tuned because that episode will drop next Monday.